Hi there, I'm Matthew Herzberg, and this is the Myopia Mindset. In this episode, it's part two of the practice showdown between Dr. Matthew Martin and Dr. Paul Levine. I can't believe that this was such a great discussion that we had to go into a part two. And if you're a paid supporter of the Myopia Mindset, if you went to myopiamindset.substack.com, you saw the extended version of part one of this episode. This picks up basically right where we left off, and you are going to learn so much. I can't believe there is so much to be gained from just comparing two people's practices. And I got to tell you, I think I'm going to continue this style of episode because not only is it a great discussion, but when you really get into the nitty gritty about what each practitioner is doing, you can gain so much benefit from it. Inspiration, motivation, education. Let's go. All right, welcome back to the Myopia Mindset. This is your weekly dose of motivation, inspiration, and education on your path to success with myopia management. And this is part two of comparing two practices. I have two top-tier myopia management specialists in Matthew Martin and Paul Levine. Gentlemen, welcome back to the program.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Super excited to be here.
And these two guys are known throughout our industry. They are both fellows. They've played a huge role in the AAOMC. They speak on this topic together and separately. You can find them on stage at Vision by Design. And when you go to Vision by Design, definitely walk up and introduce yourself to these two guys because they are just as great in person as they are on the podcast, even better, I would say. And you will definitely find your connection with them. Welcome to your tribe in myopia management. So, gentlemen, we had ended our last episode with still so many things to talk about. I was like super into everything we were doing, and I was like, let's have you guys back. And just a quick recap, we were comparing Paul and Matthew's practices because there are things that they are doing very similarly, but there are also a lot of things that they are doing differently. And I think that is fascinating. And I want to jump right back into it. Let's start with axial length. And we were kind of chomping at the bit before we hit record on this. So Paul, I'm going to start with you because you were rocking and rolling before we got going about axial length. Why is axial length such an important part of your practice?
Oh man, because it's just so objective, and repeatable. It takes every subjectivity away. It takes the examiner subjectivity away. It takes the patient subjectivity away. It's like this is just a number. This is real. This is like I could measure how, long your thumb is from your knuckle to the tip. Like that. That's a change. That's a real number. So being able to having the capacity of doing axial length, especially with optical biometry and not having to numb the eye and not having to applanate the eye, which is fine. It's how I started with axial length, but I just love the utility of being able to just point and shoot. It's easy. Kids as young as 3 and 4 years old could actually manage to sit for it. And it just gives you so much information. And anybody that does ortho K and anybody that does a lot of ortho K knows that Murphy's Law always exists. And, the patient wears their lenses 364 days, nights a year, except for the night before they came in to see you for their annual ortho K evaluation. And and so, okay, the vision's not 20/20, and okay, I might be measuring minus 0.50 or minus 0.75, right? But if I have the axial length information, at least I have a really good idea if we've been stable or we're starting to drift a little bit. And so that's why I think it's just so vital. It's so impossible to really know how well you're controlling things if you don't have axial length at your disposal.
Yeah, definitely. And Matthew Martin, you are obviously doing axial length in your practice as well. Tell us about that.
Honestly, axial length measurement has been a sea change for us over the last 5 years, for example, or maybe it's been 6 years. We started applanating the cornea, anesthetic in the eye. My results varied quite a bit. But what was amazing about it was because we do so much ortho K, and I think this absolutely applies to low dose atropine as well as peripheral defocus contact lenses like the MySight, we would just not know. Like I'd be working with a patient for years, same retainers year after year. I'm ordering duplicates, things are going great. But the parents are asking me, how big is my child's prescription getting? You know, they started out as a -4. Are they a -6 now when we wash them out of their vision retainers? And we just had no idea. And then now that we measure that, that is truly myopia management. I will make the argument boldly that if you're not measuring the axial length measurement and you're not taking that into consideration when you're doing myopia management, you are not really doing myopia management. Or if you're doing it, you're not doing it at the level you certainly should be. And Paul makes an incredible point. My conversations now are not about 4 diopters, 6 diopters, 8 diopters. My conversations are like, man, your child's 25.75 millimeters, and I'm worried they're going to get to 26, because if they get to 26, that's when the problems go up dramatically. And here's what we need to do. And we've got them on peripheral defocus contact lenses, but it's not working. And now I'm going to add low dose atropine in order to slow things down more or to change things. I mean, it is so incredibly essential. If you're listening to this podcast and you do myopia management and you don't have an axial length measuring device, you need to get one, no ifs, ands, or buts, period.
Right. Right. So can I assume that each of you are measuring axial length on every kid that comes into your practice?
Yep.
I do.
And what has that always been the case, or did you start out just doing, for the kids you had in a myopia management program? Like, how did you get into that particular frame of mind?
Well, I can tell you that for me, like I said, making the transition to optical biometry made it as easy as auto refraction.
Mm,
It's very delegatable.
mm,
So, you might want to do your own topographies, and I agree with that. Well, at least when you're doing a new fit. But I mean, the wonderful part about optical biometry is everyone can get on it. It takes a minute and a half, and you can train your staff in 5 minutes how to do it.
mhm.
So, it for me, every eh, it might maybe I'm giving away free service, I know that, but what I'm doing is I'm planting that first seed toward myopia management. Whenever I get a young kid in the office, I want to know what that axial length is so I have a baseline to start with.
Yeah.
So I'm in 100% agreement. I have been a big proponent for years, and I preach this from stage, and I know Paul does too. Myopia management and being a myopia management specialist is a long-term game, meaning you don't have a patient come in one time and you're like, your child's got to do myopia management. These things often start with a 3 or 4-year-old. I'm seeing him as a patient. We run Myopia Master on him. That's our axial length measuring device in our office. And then I can tell the parent, hey, look, your kid's going to be a -6. I know that. I can look at their genetics. I can look at their axial length measurements. Your child is on their way to a big number. And we know that. We know that's likely going to be the case. That starts the conversation. Sometimes the parents are like, I don't want to do anything. Like, okay, no problem. We'll see your child in 6 months. We'll see your child a year after, or 6 months after that for the yearly exam. And then it might be 2 years later that I'm like, okay, your child went from +0.5 to -75. We need to do something. Where it used to be, we would sit on that child till they were a -3, and then we would start trying to slow things down. Now I can tell where that kid is going, where that child is progressing, and I can say, we need to do these things. We need to take that tablet away. When you're at dinner with your child, they don't need to be sitting looking at the tablet during dinner time. We need to start talking about myopia management, talking about the things that we can do, talking about implementing a plan. I don't think you can really do it nearly as effectively without that information.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Paul.
I want to jump in there for a second. I so agree. That let's say somebody comes into your office and maybe they're only a -0.50, maybe -0.25, maybe they're even plano. They're 7 or 8 years old, right? But their corneas are really flat, maybe 40.25, but yet their axial length is 24.5 or 25. And you know that the cornea is not contributing much to that axial length, you know this is a big posterior chamber, and you know this is a myopia that's about to explode, and so if you don't, like, how would you possibly know to grade your level of concern if you don't have that piece of information? It's huge. It's vital. I
Yeah.
totally agree with Matthew.
And I had one yesterday where the child came in, not a big prescription, -1, -75, 180, something like that. Not a big prescription. But her axial length measurement was like 25 and a half or 25.6 millimeters. And I spoke to the parent. I'm like, your child is going to grow, their prescription is going to grow dramatically. And I know that because I've seen this movie before. I know that their eyeball length is going to catch up with that prescription quick and in a hurry here. And it's amazing how you get used to looking at those things now. And it changes the whole conversation. It makes it so much more easy and relatable when I can say, here's the length they are, here's the length they're going to be, here's where the problems are. And parents get that. They get that length is going to be a problem. And Dwight, one of our colleagues who's amazing, in the academy, he talks to parents and says, it really doesn't matter what the prescription is going to be diopter wise, because what we're really worried about is the stretching of that eyeball and the problems associated with that.
Yeah. And I would like to reiterate this and be Captain Obvious in the room. Having axial length and having something you can actually show the parent when you are trying to convert them into a myopia management program. If we had had that back in the day at Herzberg Optical, it would not have taken us 5 years on average to see a turnaround after talking about it over and over and over again every year. Axial length lets you bring that kid back in and redo the measurement, show them how things have changed. I've seen docs do in-office events for their parents who are considering myopia management, like an open house, and they have axial length and they have charts on the wall, and you can see where your kid lines up and what does that mean. Just to have something is that crunchy that we can put in front of parents is an absolute game changer. But what I do want to give a little bit of pushback on, and this is just playing devil's advocate, so don't get the knives and pitchforks out. Like, it is an intimidating prospect to even start ortho-K or myopia management. And part of that intimidation is cost and cost of equipment. And axial length is an easy thing to skip on when you're just starting out. So let's speak to that. Paul, you're nodding your head. What do we say to the docs who are like, look, I'm just starting out. This is already super intimidating. I don't know if I can do axial length starting out.
So I got two things. The first is, if it comes down to you're going to do myopia management, you're interested in ortho-K, and you're deciding between an axial length machine or a corneal topographer, you're going to buy the corneal topographer. And then you're going to do a bunch of fits. And then you're going to realize, like, I got a little bit of extra cash I put away from all these fits that I'm doing. And now you're going to get into axial length. And there's plenty of used equipment out there. Cataract surgeons are updating their optical biometers all the time. And so, there's a big used market for axial length. It's probably harder to find one now than it was a few years ago. But, the new systems are awesome and they have beautiful reports and it really makes things easy. But it is that can be a big ticket. And so, I think axial length is vital, but I don't think it's the first piece of equipment you need to buy with regard to this. Now, the thing I want to mention is that you may have colleagues, you may even have your cataract surgeon who you're sending patients to constantly, that maybe they would be willing to have your patient come in just for a short kind of um, uh, consultation and have an axial length measurement done. Maybe that's possible. Maybe that's a way to sort of start. I don't know. I haven't done it that way, but perhaps it's possible.
Right. And I want to go back to this idea that you should be doing axial length. And I have heard this before, are we doing a disservice to everyone if we're not measuring for axial length? Matthew Martin, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so I have a bunch of things to say. So the first thing that I want to say is I tried sending my patients to the cataract surgeon, and the
Okay.
cataract surgeons would not play.
Okay.
They were not interested in helping out. They were not interested in even giving me like a out of pocket fee for it or anything like that. Now that may be just a suggestion that my cataract surgeons are underwhelming in my area, or maybe they just we don't have a good as relationship as I would like to have with my cataract surgeons. I am here to tell you that you're going to have a topographer, right? And when I used to do I used to do a lecture in boot camp about things to have to get going, and I used to talk about topographers, and I would say, buy your topographer, figure out 10 patients you want to fit, buy your topographer, take the profit from those 10 patients and pay for your topographer. Because at that time, topographers are only about 10 grand. They're more expensive now. I'm here to tell you that the topographer is absolutely essential. I honestly would be thinking my second piece of equipment, obviously you're going to have a slit lamp already and a phoropter. I'm thinking my second piece of equipment would be some type of axial length measuring device, because your conversion rate is going to skyrocket when you can say, here's the length of your child's eye, here's what it's going to be, we should be doing something about this. So yes, I understand the money thing, but I also understand that investment in infrastructure is almost always going to pay off in the end. Look
Right.
at the American road system. In the 1950s and 60s, we invested in highways and expressways. Yes, it was ridiculously expensive. Could you imagine going somewhere without the expressway now?
Right.
I mean, there's just no way you would do that, right? At the time, it was, wow, what a ridiculous amount of money. Why would we ever spend that money? But man, I can travel from here to 70 miles away and do it an hour flat, where if I had to do it by a 2-lane road, it would take me an hour and a half or 2 hours or whatever. So infrastructure, when it's done right, can be very profitable. And in the long run, that's going to continue to pay off for years to come.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. What about the other thing that I had mentioned are folks who are not measuring axial length doing a disservice to the rest of the myopia management industry, to the docs who are doing it? Is that a thing? Because I have heard this. Is this is this true?
You want Paul or me?
I'm
Oh,
gonna I'm gonna ask you, Matthew Martin.
okay. So I try not to offend people because I'm a nice person. I want us to all get along. I'm telling you, if you're not measuring axial length measurement, you're doing people a disservice. You're not
Okay.
giving people all that they deserve, and you're doing a disservice to the doctors who are investing in the infrastructure to be the most efficacious we can. I think you should be measuring axial length measurement. And if you're saying you're doing myopia management and you're not even considering getting a piece of equipment like that at some point, then I think you are doing the rest of us a disservice. And I think that also comes down to a lot of times those are the same doctors who aren't charging for a low dose atropine program, who aren't charging for peripheral defocus contact lenses. All you're doing is muddying the waters, and I don't think you're doing the job you need to be doing for your patients. And I think you're doing a disservice to the profession, or at least to the specialty.
Yeah. Paul, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with that. It's not a trivial piece of information. I mean, it's practically as important as the actual amount of myopia you're dealing with. So, but I will say this, I don't think you can, or I don't think you really should, promote yourself as an expert in myopia management if you're not doing axial length.
Okay.
I think it's okay to manage myopia. I don't think it's okay to put it on your business card that you're an expert in myopia management if you're not doing axial lengths.
Right. So, based on that, how long do we have until axial length becomes the standard of care? Because, I think it already should be
6 months ago,
six
a year
months ago.
ago,
Yeah.
it was
Well,
standard
I
of
think
care.
it's going to take, it's got to be more coming from industry as much as
Mhm.
it's coming from doctors. So for instance, every practice, just about every practice has an auto refractor. Well, once they start building an axial length into auto refraction, then everybody has it.
Right.
And that I, I don't know anything about what I just said. Does that cost millions, billions? I have no idea, you know, but if it was that everybody does auto refraction, most everybody does, but everybody does K readings, whether it's from an old keratometer or an auto keratometer or your topographer. You can't bill a comprehensive examination without K readings. So at some point, if that just becomes part of the pretest, auto refraction, auto K, axial length, then everybody's on board. And then
Yeah.
you decide to do with it what you will.
Right. Yeah, and I made this example before. I remember early days of the AAOMC back when it was the Orthokeratology Academy of America, and we would get phone calls from parents who had talked to somebody claiming they do Ortho K, and the parent had done a decent amount of research on their own, and they said, is a topographer required to do Ortho K? Right? That's the question we would get, and this would come up more often than you think. And we had to say, look, it's not required to do Ortho K, but they should be doing it they should be using a topographer to do Ortho K. And at the academy, we consider it absolutely essential that in order to do orthokeratology properly. And I remember that time period where you had docs who were attempting to do Ortho K but didn't have a topographer. We had to be very careful about how we worded this when we talk to the public. And nowadays, we don't have that problem, I think. Nowadays, topographer is essential. You wouldn't do Ortho K without it, in my opinion.
I think that's 100% true. I couldn't even imagine attempting Ortho K without a topographer. It'd be like not looking through a slit lamp. You're going to need to know what that cornea looks like. You're going to need to know what you're doing. I think you're going to see the axial length measuring component of myopia management will be on the same level as the OCT component with glaucoma. So when I see a 6-month glaucoma follow-up or a 3-month glaucoma follow-up, for the 6-month visit, I'm running OCT visual field and a follow-up, and that's just how it is. My staff's like, do we run the OCT? I'm like, well, of course, we always run those together. And that's just how it is. And I couldn't imagine doing glaucoma without an OCT. I couldn't imagine doing axial length measurements without or couldn't imagine doing myopia management without axial length measurements.
Right. Right. And Paul, you had mentioned, this is something that you can delegate to staff members. So I want to use this as our transition into staff training, staff implementation, and delegation. So, Paul, tell us about your practice and the staff at your practice.
We actually run a pretty lean practice. And, I have my partner and I both do primary care, but we each have different specialties. His is in behavioral and mine is in myopia. So, we have a 4th year. We do a 4th year externship, although we're probably going to be discontinuing that soon. But the students come in, and I mean, part of what we do is train them, but part of what they do is learn how to do this stuff. And they get real practical experience doing it. So the days that, the students working with me, they learn a lot about managing myopia. And by the way, they're taking the topographies and doing the refractions for me on my post fits, while I'm doing other things, with other patients. And so that's been a really good thing because it's good to train the next, batch of myopia managers out there, and myopia specialists. But we also have, we have a technician also, and our we sort of share that we have one tech and one student. And so the tech she's really interesting, actually. She worked for many, many years in an ophthalmology practice in a cataract surgeon's office. And when she came to work for us, she didn't know what Ortho K was. She barely knew what a contact lens was. And she was like, her mind was like blown when she saw what Ortho K actually was, and so she got really excited about it, got really into it. And so she helps me a tremendous amount with that stuff. She's great at topography. She's great at, she inspects lenses and she does all my trainings for me. And which is huge, by the way. Like, if you're going to hire one person to do one thing in your office that's really good at it, find somebody to train these kids how to put the lenses in and take them out. It takes a degree of patience that I have not had for years. When I first started practicing, I had to do all my own trainings. I'm just talking soft lenses and stuff. I'm talking before ortho-K, because I've been at this for a long time. And God, did I hate doing trainings. And every year that I got 1 year older, I hated doing it even more. And now I'm so thankful to have somebody that I can just be like, okay, my part's done. Off you
Mhm.
go to Debbie, and I don't have to worry at all that the rest of it's going to be perfect. And honestly, that's a huge part of the customer service. These kids can't, and these parents can't go home wondering like, oh God, I don't know if I know what, and Debbie's not afraid to say, we've had enough for one day.
Mhm.
This was a great training session. I think we're done. We're going to have you, we're not going to bring the lenses home tonight. We're going to come back next week. We're going to do this again. We want to make sure that they know exactly what they're doing. And so having somebody that you have that much faith in, and just know they're going to make the right decision is great. I love it. It's awesome. And that's what you need. So you need somebody that's really invested, and really good at working with kids. Because I'm telling you, training can be brutal.
Yeah. Yeah.
You both know.
For sure. Matthew Martin, what does your staff look like? Do you have a lean staff? Do you have a huge staff? Like, what does it look like at your practice?
Yeah, I would say our staff is fairly medium. So I actually would like to tell you that my superpower is delegation. And I actually have a t-shirt that one of my staff is designing for me specifically for this purpose. So to me, delegation is where the magic is at. My staff takes the topographies for me, and they take 5 topographies per eye on the first day of my ortho-K evaluations. And then if I don't like them, I can go back and help them to tweak what needs to be done. But I would rather train my staff well and get good information and good results than do it myself. I haven't done a training on putting retainers in and out in years, and I hate the idea of even doing it. My staff handles that. My staff handles dispenses. As much as I can get other people to do, I am all in on that. So when I'm ordering product, I have a good relationship with a lot of labs. Unlike some doctors, I order from about 6 different labs. So sometimes I'm sending an email. Last night I spent an hour on the phone with a colleague of mine designing a translimbo that got ordered through Wave. But then I just send an email to my staff, and I send it to the entire staff, but with my number one technician, Ivy, in there. And I'm like, this is what needs to happen. The patient needs an INR, followed by a first morning follow-up. And then, dude, I forget about it. And then they'll come to me and they're like, well, we're missing a set of retainers for a patient. I'm like, well, I have no idea. I don't even remember having done that because I did it and somebody else is handling it. And because there's a chain, they know what to do to fix it. For
Mhm.
me, I would rather invest an extra hour or 2 into training so I don't have to do that stuff on the regular. I just have no interest. I want to breeze in, look at the topography, look at the cornea, tell them how great they're doing, talk about the axial length measurements somebody else took, talk about everything, get a quick refraction, and I'm going to bounce. If you need some work, let's have the staff do it. So I am all about the delegation. We do staff training. We had a lunch 2 weeks ago on scleral lens training because I had 3 or 4 staff members who didn't know how to do scleral lenses. So I reviewed some things with scleral lenses. We watched a video. I bought everybody sandwiches or something from someplace. And then I thought we were done. And then I go into the break room. We have this huge break room, big conference table, 65-inch television back there, which I put together for my staff. I go in the break room, and Max, one of my employees who's been with us for about 4 years, he's going to be an eye doctor, super awesome guy. He's back there doing an education to follow up on the scleral lens training that they weren't sure about, and he's handling that himself. And I'm like,
Mhm.
awesome. I poked my head in. He's teaching them how to fill up the scleral lens and put stuff in there. And I'm like, all right, have fun, guys. I am all about the delegation. The more other people can do, the more I can go in and have fun. and do the stuff that I want to do that I'm good at.
And how did we get to this point? Either one of you jump in, because I have been in so many practices where, the staff is just, it's a huge X factor. I was in a staff, in the Washington State, in Seattle area, and I was talking about the necessity of getting quality topography capture and getting multiple images. And the doc looked me in the eye and said, if the staff is not on board with this, this is not going to happen. And a little part of me died inside because I come from a practice where there was only 5 people at most in this practice. Now these practices have like 15 people on deck, and it was like we had to know how to do all of these things. So what is our how do we get to the point where you guys are at? What kind of steps, what kind of things did you do to build up a quality, reliable staff?
Well, I'll go first on that. You did a podcast with me. I don't know if you remember it. A podcast called Building Future Doctors. So we
Mhm.
had a program where we would bring in 2 high school students and they would become our technicians, our myopia management people. And we would train 2 students a year to be technicians doing all these testing, doing INRs, doing all that stuff. And we did that over and over and over and over and over again. So we got a pretty amazing manual of procedures that we were able to keep passing on to them. And so we just used all that information with the new technician I have, because now we have a full-time tech. We went away from the co-op program. And then all that information is there. So for us, it developed organically just by having to do that training over and over and over again, so that we had people passing on the knowledge to the next. I think it really just starts with the doctor figuring out what they want to do and what they don't want to do, and then figuring out how to get someone to do the stuff that you don't enjoy.
Yeah, Paul.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, when you're first starting out, especially if you start your own practice, things are really lean and you can't probably afford a lot of additional staff. So you do a lot of things by yourself because you don't really have a choice. Stuff's got to
Mhm.
get done. And if you're the only one there, guess what? You're the one who's doing it. But eventually I think you reach that point in your practice where you realize like, I'm really good at collecting data, but a lot of people can be good at collecting data. What I'm really, really good at is analyzing data. And
Mhm.
so once you kind of come to that place, this is where you say, my time is much better spent analyzing than collecting. Now, I will say there is something to be learned by collecting data because you see body language, you watch how people are, reading 2020 minus 2 that somebody else measured for you doesn't necessarily tell you how easy or how difficult it was, and so I think that there is still some validity to collecting your own data.
Yeah.
I think we've gotten a little too far to the, you know, I don't even introduce myself to the patient until they're already signed, sealed, and practically delivered. I still do like to spend some time in the exam room doing the refractive tests and the binocular workups. Like I still like to do that stuff myself.
Mhm.
Which I agree
Um,
100%.
but if it's like an ortho KPE, I don't need to spend very much time with that person unless there's a problem. So that's a situation where I walk into the room after, the lenses have been progenting and inspected, the topographies have been done, the axial lengths have been done, the refraction has been done, the VAs have been collected. Now I just go in, I might pick up my retinoscope at a +2 lens and just kind of wave it over their eyes, do a thorough slit lamp exam, and that's it, I'm done. So I think you pick and choose where you delegate but eventually I think it's that mindset of my time is way better spent doing this, where I know I can train somebody to competently do that.
Mhm.
So I think it like Matthew's he's coined it perfectly. It's the doctor's mindset,
Right.
and I still have plenty of colleagues that won't use a tech and do everything from, beginning, middle, and end with their patients. I'd burn out way too fast if I was doing that all day, every day. I can tell you that.
I think that brings up an interesting conversation. So you have colleagues taking the patient, picking them up in the reception area, doing all the pre-testing, the whole shooting match.
Mm.
See, I did that when I first got started because I didn't have a technician for the first 6 months or a year or whatever. But I don't think that makes as good of an impression on a patient as having a good professional and competent technician, because I think that lends the doctor more weight in some ways. I'm not sure if a doctor collecting some of that basic stuff, to me, like I wouldn't want to go to my cardiologist and have him putting the electrodes on me and reading the EKG. I'd be like, is this your first day? Like, I mean, right?
Yeah.
In some point, that doctor needs to be higher up the food chain. I'm not saying you shouldn't do your refractions. I'm not saying you shouldn't do your slit lamps, but I am saying it would feel weird to me if the surgeon was in there cleaning me up and shaving me for an open heart surgery. Like, that'd
Yeah.
be a little strange, right? Like,
Agreed.
I think there needs to be some level of delegation, kind of no matter what.
Yeah, and I would also add that having that staff member as a form of redundancy feels like the wrong word, but like to have that staff member who is also growing in knowledge and has become comfortable talking about all of these core principles, to have them as a backup, because doctor doesn't always get it right every single time. Sometimes the schedule gets away from us at the office, and maybe doctor didn't mention things the way that they should have, and just being able to say, oh, did Dr. Herzberg talk with you about ortho K? They did. Great, awesome, let's go to the next thing, right? And also having that reliable person that the patient can turn to with myopia questions, is a very valuable resource. And it's very empowering for staff to learn how to do more. I can speak from that experience. When I used to go into practices, when I've done some consulting, and I would work heavily with staff, and I would have to have this really embarrassing moment where I'd be like, okay, well, now we're going to talk about topography capture. And when it comes time for me to demonstrate how to do this, you are going to see how bad I've become at it, because I used to do this every single day at the practice I grew up in, but I haven't done this for 15 years. And this is something I need to keep practicing in order to do it well. Do you guys have some sort of training regimen in place to keep the staff sharp like that, to check in with them every so often? I mean, Matthew Martin, we've done a past podcast where you've identified that, maybe the right thing wasn't done, or things got lax, and you had a staff member who had answered the phone when somebody had called and hadn't known exactly what to say, and you had gotten so used to the staff working so well that you realized that this member hadn't gotten the appropriate amount of training that they needed. Do you remember when we talked about that?
Yeah, and I think it's important to keep a pulse on that. While we're talking about delegation, I would actually like to take a little tiny side chain here
Sure.
and talk about one of the things I see a lot of other doctors do, and I want everyone who's listening to think about how you treat your staff. So whenever I'm talking about my technician, or I'm talking about my optician, or I'm talking about my receptionist, I always couch it in the perspective of, this is Ivy. She is amazing. She's going to do a fantastic job. She knows what she's doing. She is awesome, and she's going to take fantastic care of you. You know what? Honestly, I think she's better at this than I am. Or I'll bring out a patient to my optician. And again, this is not ortho K related. I'll be like, you're going to work with Debbie because you know what? Debbie's awesome. And Debbie's more, well, what about XYZ? Honestly, Debbie knows this stuff way better than I do because she is top notch. I see doctors belittle their staff. I see doctors talk down to their staff. And all it does is make everybody look less intelligent and erode the confidence in your patients. So if you're one of those doctors out there that struggles in this regard, you need to get on the right side of right and start saying, you're going to work with this technician. You know what? Her topographies are fantastic. And if they're not, we'll work as a team to overcome what was wrong. Or maybe she didn't get it quite right. You know, she's really good at this, but maybe this one wasn't quite up to speed, but we'll fix that. I think you need to train. I think you need to check in with your staff periodically. And then I also think you need to reinforce their expertise publicly in front of your patients.
Paul, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's great. I like that. I try really hard. I never refer to like my tech, my optician. I never use those words to patients, it like you said, it's always, this is Debbie, this is Lisa, they're gonna, you know, they're gonna help you out now. Like I always try to do that. So because I do think that that could come across as maybe you might feel a little bit belittled if somebody refers to you like that. And I think most of us are well enough aware of human, interaction, um, to make sure that these people are special, and you want your patients to realize that they're fortunate to be working with these, talented professionals. So yeah, I can't even imagine belittling staff,
Yeah.
and if you're a staff member, why you're going to stand for that.
Yeah. Yeah, when I've consulted, when I've been in practices and I work specifically with staff, I feel like I have a talent for doing that because I come from staff. So I say to them like, "Look, you are the most important part of this entire equation because the doctor is going to design these lenses based on the good quality work that we provide them. We are the stable structure that is enabling them to do this rock star thing and change these kids' lives and really make a difference and really bring something to this practice that's truly special. And you are the core of that entire process. And they respond very well to that. It's like you outline what their role is, how it benefits them, and also that these are very valuable skills that can take them very far in a practice and make them an essential component. And I think this also, I say it all the time, but we need to charge appropriately so that we can compensate our staff for the great job that they're doing so we can retain them. And that will come back to you. That's part of that investment that Matthew Martin was mentioning from my perspective. Do you guys agree with that?
Of course.
Excellent. All right. Oh, Matthew.
Yeah, this is a thing that I talk about all the time. Whenever Paul and I are on stage, whenever I'm on stage, anytime, any place, anywhere, you need to charge accordingly so that when you get a myopia management patient, you're like, yes, I'm excited. This is going to be awesome. There's going to be enough profit there to make everything flow. You should be stoked about myopia management, not only because you're changing lives for the better, not only because you're preventing people from having problems, but also it should be profitable. And if it's not profitable, then you're doing yourself a disservice, you're doing the patients a disservice. And it's really hard. And I think Paul um, uh, touched on this earlier. It's really hard to be enthusiastic if you're not happy to be doing it. And that's, again, comes back to the delegation. You need to train, you need to delegate, you need to relieve yourself some responsibility so that you can enjoy the things that you enjoy because you're going to be better at it.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, and your staff will tell you too. They'll be like, "Why are we doing this?" If they have that kind of agency in your practice, they'll be like, "Doc, why are we doing this? It seems like this requires a lot of time and effort, and we are just spinning our wheels here. Like, what is going on?" Staff will be the first people to be able to point that out if they're empowered to do so. Do you guys let staff have like input on how the practice runs and because they can often tell you things that you don't see because they probably spend more time with patients than the average optometrist do. So how much input, Matthew, how much input does staff have at your practice?
So my staff has incredible amount of input, which sometimes is frustrating for me, because sometimes their feedback can be refreshingly precise and blunt, for lack of a better term. But it has also led me to a position where we have undone some things that weren't working well, or we have made some nuances to things. I have had staff members in the past pull me aside and go, another hyperopic presbyopic fit? Like, are you charging enough for how the amount of time you're going to spend on this fit? And they were right. I needed to back off at that time. I didn't have the tools. I didn't have the equipment. I didn't have what I needed. And they were right to check me on it. And a lot of times it can be not hurtful. I don't want to use that term, but I will use the term insightful, but it's almost always beneficial because they want this organism to survive and be successful so that we're all happier and we all get paid more and we all have more success. And I think you have to have that feedback, and they need to feel good about being able to give that feedback, even when it can be frustrating or even when it can seem like it's maybe not as productive as I would like it to be. But you also have to separate just the grouching, because I don't put up with just grouching. If you want to come to me with a problem, come to me with a problem and a suggestion on what we can do to make it better.
Yeah. Paul, what kind of input does staff have at your practice?
My staff is not generally come to me and say, I think we should do this. I don't like that. Let's try this. Let's try that. And maybe they don't, because anytime I make a decision to try something new or change something, I bring it to them. This is what I'm thinking. What do you guys think? And so it's the decisions, I mean, ultimately are mine to make, but I try not to make them without at least some input and some dialogue about, back and forth. So they may not come to me directly and say, I think this, but I always go to them and say, I'm thinking of this. What do you guys think? And then we kind of hash through it.
Right. Matthew Martin, you have a piece of paper you were
I
holding up.
do. This is my receptionist / office manager making an argument for hiring another receptionist. And it's annotated. It's got several pages of information on it, including some tentative scheduling changes, some tentative things to do with an employee who might need some hours but has been too busy to assist us. So this is a perfect example of they feel comfortable enough to come to me and be like, here's what we need to do. I know you don't want to just hear me grouch, so I went ahead and took the liberty of putting a plan together. And that's kind of great, right? Because I didn't want to do this, right? But my staff felt empowered to bring it to me. And we had a discussion about it today. And I'm like, there's some things we need to do. I'm a little unhappy with this. Let's change this around. But I think ultimately this is going to be something that's going to benefit the practice, benefit this person in their position. And interestingly enough, allow them to delegate some of the things that they're doing now, which is overwhelming and busy work, and raise them up so that they're more management. My goal, I don't have an associate like Paul. I'm working on getting an associate because my goal is to delegate as much as possible so I can get higher up and be able to do more steering or being able to do more developmental things. And I would like the whole staff to be able to move up as well so that we can have enough people to do the stuff, but also not be bogged down by minutia.
Right. Right. Okay, let's move into practice management because I think that often has a tie in with staff. And then we'll end with troubleshooting at the back half of this episode. All right, well, that's it for this regular version of the episode, but the discussion doesn't stop here. It actually continues in an extended version of this episode, which is available to our Substack supporters. You can, if you're interested in getting the rest of the episode, consider becoming a paid supporter of the Myopia Mindset. In addition to an extended version of this episode and every other episode that we do, you'll also get access to exclusive monthly bonus episodes of the Myopia Mindset. And I know you're interested. You've made it this far. And for the cost is $12 a month, which is basically the cost of a cup of coffee each and every week. And that's how I like to put it. Listen, if you would buy me a cup of coffee each and every week to nerd out about myopia, to bring on amazing guests, to spread the word about how awesome myopia management is and how more ECPs should be engaged in this specialty, then please consider becoming a paid supporter of the Myopia Mindset. You can do so on our Substack. myopiamindset.substack.com is how you do that. Thank you so much for your consideration. I'll see you at the next one.